It starts like any other day at the port of Tema. Giant cranes swing above the horizon. The smell of diesel and salt lingers in the air. But buried within the ordinary noise of trade is an extraordinary truth. Ghana, a peaceful coastal country once seen as the poster child of Western diplomacy in Africa, is quietly becoming the most important gatekeeper for a new geopolitical alliance forming deep in the heart of the Sahel. What if I told you that one landlocked country, Burkina Faso, now sends more than 1 million tons of goods each year through Tema? That this number has doubled since 2022, and that Ghana, by opening its doors, is playing a central role in a historic economic shift that has Washington and Paris watching nervously. This is not just a story about trade. It's a story about survival, strategy, and silent revolutions taking place not on the battlefield, but on shipping manifests, rail corridors, and tax ledgers. Tema Port, perched on the Gulf of Guinea, is Ghana's largest and busiest port. In 2023 alone, Tema handled nearly 18 million metric tons of cargo and more than 1.7 million containers. These aren't just numbers, they represent supply chains, livelihoods, and national stability for countries like Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. Landlocked and isolated from global sea routes, these Sahel nations depend on a handful of coastal ports, and Tema is quickly becoming the most reliable. Why? Because Ghana offers something the others don't: stability, neutrality, and massive investment in infrastructure. Consider this: Ghana has already completed a major stretch of railway between Tema and Mpakadan, the first 97 kilometers of what will eventually become a Tema-Ouagadougou corridor, connecting the port directly to the capital of Burkina Faso. That's not just a train line. It's an economic lifeline for a region seeking independence not just politically, but logistically. Meanwhile, the government, through a public-private partnership with Meridian Port Services and Maersk, has invested over $1 billion to expand Tema's handling capacity, aiming to make it the primary gateway to the entire Sahel region. These are not temporary moves. They signal Ghana's ambition to become West Africa's logistics hub, a role that could redefine its place in regional politics. And the results are already visible. Ghana earns about $34 million annually from transit trade with Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. That's not counting the ripple effects: new jobs in logistics, warehousing, transport, and services across southern Ghana. But this isn't just about Ghana's gain. For Burkina Faso, Tema is a matter of life and death. With no coastline, its economy relies on foreign ports to import fuel, food, medical supplies, and construction materials. More than 3.2 million tons of goods move through Ghana's roads each year toward Burkina Faso. Any disruption, be it bureaucratic, political, or logistical, can paralyze entire sectors overnight. So, while most eyes are fixed on the battlegrounds of the Sahel, the real power may be shifting quietly through Ghanaian customs offices, along railway tracks, and inside warehouses by the sea. But here's the twist: not everything is running smoothly. And, as we'll see next, behind Tema's rise lies a hard truth, one that Burkina Faso's struggling businesses are now forced to confront. For many businesses in Burkina Faso, the port of Tema is not just a gateway, it is a gamble. Imagine owning a small logistics company in Ouagadougou. You have invested everything to secure a container of medical equipment or agricultural supplies. It finally reaches Tema, only to face a wall of delays, taxes, and opaque procedures. You wait. Every day that passes costs money, and every extra charge eats into your already fragile margins. This is not hypothetical. It is the daily reality for countless Burkinabè importers. The first hurdle is stacked taxes. While Tema is marketed as a hub for transit trade, many Burkinabè shippers report facing an avalanche of fees. These include not only VAT or value-added tax, but also COVID levies, education taxes, and health service surcharges. Officially, these are meant for internal Ghanaian commerce, but in practice, they are often applied to transit goods as well, goods that are simply passing through on their way to a landlocked neighbor. Then come the infrastructure delays. Containers can sit for days, sometimes weeks, waiting for clearance. The processing pace is slow, and coordination between agencies often lacks cohesion. Importers are charged daily for storage. For every 24 hours of delay, they pay fees for demurrage, yard handling, and security inspections. One Burkinabè shipper recently told a local business paper, "Each delay at Tema costs me the equivalent of 2 months' profit. We are paying to stand still." And worse still, there is the risk of seizure. Cases have surfaced of valuable cargo vehicles, electronics, even food products being seized and auctioned by Ghanaian customs for reasons as vague as documentation issues or suspected violations. For many small traders, these losses are unrecoverable. Beyond the port itself, the road to Burkina Faso is riddled with checkpoints. Drivers report being stopped up to 15 times on the route between Tema and Ouagadougou, often asked for informal fees or additional paperwork. Each stop means more delays, more expenses, and more uncertainty. The result is a growing sense of frustration and fatigue among the Burkinabè business community. Many feel that despite being Tema's largest transit client, they are being treated like second-class users. To their credit, Ghanaian authorities are listening. After months of complaints, the Ghana Ports and Harbors Authority and Ghana Shippers Authority initiated talks with Burkinabè counterparts in early 2025. One of the first outcomes was a commitment to eliminate VAT on transit goods, a move long demanded by Sahelian businesses. Digitization has also become a key focus. Ghana is pushing for more efficient, paperless customs systems, aiming to reduce clearance times and minimize corruption. But implementation is still in early stages, and shippers say it is too soon to feel real impact. What is clear, however, is that change is urgently needed, because for Burkina Faso, delays and extra costs at Tema are not just an inconvenience. They can mean the difference between getting food to market or watching it rot in a warehouse, between delivering medicine to a clinic or facing stockouts, between growth and collapse. And behind these numbers and policies are real people truck drivers stranded for days, traders borrowing at high interest to cover surprise port charges, families waiting for essential goods that may never arrive. If Tema is truly going to be the lifeline of the Sahel, then it must work not just for Ghana, but for those who rely on it the most. Something changed when John Mahama returned to power in 2025. It was not in his speeches always polished, always presidential. It was not even in his cabinet appointments or campaign slogans. It was in his direction. Ghana, under Mahama, began to turn not abruptly, not defiantly, but decisively away from its long-standing position as a favored Western ally and toward something different, something closer to home. Call it what you will, regional autonomy, South-South realignment, or just practical diplomacy, the shift is clear. Ghana is reimagining its place in Africa, and John Mahama is leading that redefinition. In the months following his inauguration, Mahama wasted no time in signaling a new era. He called for African solutions to African problems not in theory, but in practice, most notably, by reaching out to the leadership of the Sahel. In early 2025, he welcomed Ibrahim Traore, the transitional president of Burkina Faso, for bilateral talks in Accra. The two leaders signed agreements on energy security, trade facilitation, and cross-border logistics. It was a calculated move by publicly aligning Ghana's economic future with Burkina Faso. A member of the controversial alliance of Sahel states, Mahama was making a statement, both at home and abroad. And that statement was loud and clear. Ghana will no longer define its partnerships based on the approval of Washington or Paris. The shift was not limited to words or handshakes. Mahama sent delegations to AES conferences as technical observers. He met privately with leaders from Mali and Niger, the other AES nations, to explore joint infrastructure projects. And during the Paris Peace Forum later that year, he stood on stage and told a global audience, "We cannot keep waiting for development to come from the outside. The future of Africa must be built by Africans." For many in the international community, this was a red flag. Mahama, once seen as a stable Western partner, was now advocating for deeper integration with governments that had openly rejected ECOWAS, withdrawn from military pacts, and distanced themselves from traditional donor channels. But in Ghana and increasingly across West Africa, his message struck a different chord. It resonated. In a world where Western influence is seen as inconsistent, Mahama's push for self-reliance and neighbor-first policies felt both timely and necessary. It also made strategic sense. By forging closer ties with AES, Ghana positioned itself as the key coastal ally for a bloc of landlocked nations desperately in need of maritime access. Tema became more than a port. It became the bridge between two very different Africas, one still rooted in Western structures, and one seeking independence from them. Mahama's pivot did not mean turning his back on the West entirely. Ghana remains engaged with the IMF, maintains diplomatic relations with the United States, and welcomes private investment. But the tone has changed. The conditions are different, and the priorities are local. Critics may call it opportunism. Supporters call it sovereignty. What is undeniable is this: John Mahama has shifted Ghana's compass. No longer just a receiver of policy or a model student of foreign aid. Ghana is now writing its own playbook, one where the neighborhood comes first and the West comes second. And in this playbook, Tema Port is not just infrastructure. It is a symbol of who Ghana trades with, who it listens to, and ultimately, who it stands with. As the Sahel continues to drift from the orbit of Western influence, a new regional bloc is emerging fueled not by ideology, but by necessity, known as the Alliance of Sahel States, or AES. This confederation of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger is rewriting the political map of West Africa. In January 2025, the trio formally withdrew from ECOWAS, the regional organization that had once been their primary political and economic platform. Their reasoning was clear: ECOWAS, backed by Paris and Washington, no longer represented their interests. What they needed was sovereignty over security, over development, and, most critically, over logistics. But there is a problem. All three AES countries are landlocked. Their ambitions, no matter how bold, are only as strong as their access to the sea. Enter Ghana. While not a member of AES, Ghana has quietly become its most important neighbor, stable, strategically located, and home to the most advanced port infrastructure in the Gulf of Guinea. Ghana offers the one thing AES desperately needs: a reliable door to the ocean. Tema Port, with its $1 billion expansion, is capable of handling over 1.7 million containers annually. Its 18 million metric tons of cargo throughput make it the ideal partner for AES's growing demand. But the connection goes deeper than just numbers. In March 2025, Burkina Faso made a bold move. Its national oil company, Sonabai, purchased a major fuel storage facility inside the Tema multipurpose terminal. The deal, valued at approximately $70 million or around 39 billion CFA francs, gave Burkina Faso strategic control over its fuel imports. It also cemented Tema, not Abidjan, not Lome, as its preferred maritime partner. This was no ordinary transaction. It was a geopolitical signal, one that said we may have left ECOWAS, but we have not left trade. And Ghana, under John Mahama, welcomed the opportunity, with his government advocating a policy of strategic neutrality. Tema's doors remained open so long as transit goods respected Ghana's customs regulations and infrastructure limits. It is a delicate dance. Ghana is trying to balance multiple interests honoring ECOWAS treaties, avoiding direct confrontation with Western partners, and still building deeper ties with its Sahelian neighbors. One example is the Ghana-Burkina Faso railway corridor. The first 97 kilometers from Tema to Mpakadan are complete. The plan is to extend it through northern Ghana and eventually into Ouagadougou, creating a seamless trade route. It is slow, costly, and complex, but the symbolism is undeniable. Ghana is building a bridge, a literal one. AES leaders, especially Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, have called for multiple maritime routes to secure independence. Some proposals involve corridors through Morocco, others eye Guinea's coastal access. But at present, only Ghana has the infrastructure ready, the political willingness, and the economic interest to make it work now. That gives Ghana leverage and risk, because each container that crosses Tema for AES strengthens a bloc that openly challenges Western dominance in the region. Each fuel shipment from Tema's tanks empowers governments who have expelled French troops, rejected IMF conditions, and embraced new security partners like Russia and Turkey. This is the paradox by serving as the logistical heart of West Africa. Ghana becomes indispensable and exposed. One foot in the world of Western-backed institutions, the other in the rising order of Sahelian defiance, but perhaps that is the future of African diplomacy, not rigid alliances, but fluid partnerships based on utility, not ideology. In this world, Tema is no longer just a port, it is a hinge on which the balance of West Africa quietly turns. Not everyone is celebrating Ghana's new role in West Africa. In Washington and Paris, the headlines tell a different story. Analysts warn that Ghana is treading dangerous ground, that by working too closely with the alliance of Sahel states governments that expelled French troops, distanced themselves from the IMF, and flirted with new partners like Russia, Ghana risks isolating itself from the West. The concern is not just political, it is structural. Western institutions, from ECOWAS to USAID to the European Union, have spent decades building economic and security frameworks across West Africa. These frameworks depend on predictability, on governments that align with international norms, and on trade corridors that serve shared interests. The rise of AES and Ghana's open arms disrupts that model. One United States policy memo leaked in early 2025 reportedly warned, this emerging logistics alliance could create a parallel economic system in West Africa, one that circumvents transparency, rule of law standards, and Western oversight. French commentators have been even more blunt. Some editorial boards have accused Mahama's government of legitimizing military regimes and undermining the ECOWAS order. Meanwhile, ECOWAS loyalists in Nigeria and Côte d'Ivoire worry that Tema's success could come at their expense, pulling away trade that once passed through Abidjan or Lagos. But Ghana insists it is not picking sides. Officials repeat the same message: trade is not politics. Helping neighbors survive is not a betrayal of old alliances. It is simply what responsible nations do. Still, the unease is palpable. Tema is now more than just a port. It is a symbol of changing tides, of new priorities, and of a continent slowly redrawing its own map. And that symbol cuts both ways. Each shipment that leaves Tema for Ouagadougou empowers a region trying to stand on its own feet. Each rail tie laid between Ghana and Burkina Faso binds the Sahel to a new future. And each tax cut, infrastructure upgrade, or customs reform is not just about money, it is about sovereignty. That is what makes this story bigger than Ghana, bigger than Mahama, bigger even than the AES. It is about Africa, an Africa that is no longer waiting for permission to grow, no longer looking outward for its answers, no longer asking for rescue. In this new world, ports become power, railways become resistance, trade becomes truth, and Ghana is showing that you can still be small, still be stable, and still be strong if you know who you are and who you stand with. So, what happens next? That depends on whether Tema's story ends at the water's edge or whether it becomes the first chapter in a new kind of African revolution. If you believe it should be the latter, then share this story, because the world needs to hear that Africa is moving and it is moving on its own terms.